Hello and welcome. I'm Stuart Craner, co-founder of Thinkers 50, which is partnering with the Higher Research Institute on the Business Ecosystem Alliance. Our aim with the Alliance is to further knowledge and best practice in the field of business ecosystems. With these objectives in mind, for this session, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Partha Ghosh. Partha is a world-renowned thought leader, problem solver, futurist, and inspirer in the field of business and technology. As a management consultant and a true global citizen, he has served heads of businesses, multinationals, and governments in close to 30 countries for more than 4 decades. Partha advises and coaches business leaders around the world and teaches at MIT and Tufts University. Today, Partha's theme is the knowledge economy 2.0, how new models of collaboration need to be evolved. Partha Ghosh, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Stuart. Thank you for offering me this great opportunity to share a few of my thoughts, which have been fermenting in my mind over the last 10, 15 years, as I think about how organizations should operate in the knowledge economy. Particularly more important as we transition what I call to knowledge economy 2.0, I do feel the need that companies, businesses, smaller or large, anywhere in the world, need to connect with the human mind with a different spirit, with a different vector. So what I would like to share with you are some of my thoughts as they emerge. And indeed, I would share with highest amount of humility that as I keep working with my clients, every time the next opportunity, I see new possibilities. So whatever I've learned in the last 10 years often gets challenged and new dimensions are explored. I suspect that would be the nature of business in the 21st century. With that, I will share my screen. And the title of today's talk is Practicing the Art and Science of Self-Regenerative Organization. But particular focus as we develop such organization, how we could capture new possibilities through the dynamics of ecosystems. In the process, I would also discuss what might be the leadership requirements in the 21st century. Now, I will begin with a little bit of a statement from Alvin Toffler, who, as you know, wrote several books, but in one of the books he wrote that illiterate of the 21st century will be not those who cannot read and write, but those who could learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I personally feel very strongly about it because as much as I help clients to solve difficult problems, but every time the solution that emerges is indeed very different from what I have perhaps practiced in an engagement 6 months ago or maybe 12 months ago. So I believe the losing organization of the 21st century will be not those who cannot innovate, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So we have to develop organization models which could learn, unlearn, and relearn at a high velocity. And that would perhaps will define their competitiveness. Now, if you look at much of the 19th and the 20th century management thinking, particularly with the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine, and the internal combustion engine, much of the focus of organizations were to drive efficiency. But as we move forward, I think increasingly we'll see, particularly as we move into knowledge economy, the challenge would be not necessarily drive efficiency, but to inspire and nurture imagination. So the big question in my mind, what should those levers be so the needle could indeed move from the right to the left? So that's what I see as the challenge of the 21st century. With that as a background, I've organized my thoughts around 3 points. First, I will talk about the emerging economy, which is basically influenced by heightened degree of uncertainty and higher level of fuzziness. So clearly we have come to a point where businesses will need to fundamentally shift gears. The second point I'll talk about, how should forward-looking organization design innovative strategies, and the need for encompassing or embracing the art and science of what I call self-regeneration. And that leads to my final point, that how should leadership define enlightened strategic synergies to refresh organization models with a Kaizen spirit or in a continuous fashion. So first we'll talk about the nature of shift we are all in the middle of. As you know, there are a lot of different forces at work on the world. We look at the convergence of technologies, which bioinformatics, genomics, neuroscience, artificial intelligence, they're all coming together. We talk about that advent of big data, sensing, artificial intelligence, and augmented reality. Then, of course, there's the issue of global warming. There's a continuous tension between Wall Street or Main Street, or the gap between the rich and poor in various parts of the world, including that of the United States, Europe. In fact, the latest data in Japan also shows there's a gap between rich and poor increasing. So as you could see, without getting into all the details, there are indeed several very powerful forces at work, and this is like a tornado. Now, the big challenge for companies is how to deal with this tornado, how not to get victimized, but use the energy of this tornado to create the new world. And indeed, when I look at the history of technologies over time, with the steam engine in the mid 1700s, then the electricity, thanks to Thomas Edison in the late 1900s, then the miniaturization, the convergence engine, where the communication, computing, commerce, and content all came together. And now we are in the middle of another S-curve where you talk about the artificial intelligence engine, we talk about 5G, we talk about symbiosis of multiple disciplines, neuroscience, genomics, they're all coming together. So obviously, we are moving into a new revolution. As we could see, the transition from the first industrial revolution, driven by internal combustion engine, then came the second industrial revolution, then came the first knowledge revolution, which I call a knowledge economy 1.0. And now we are moving into, indeed, a new economy, which I would call knowledge economy 2.0. So if I look at the character of 2.0, the most of the technologies that we are dealing with, either on the left-hand side, they're 10 to the power minus 9, where we are dealing with the nuclear forces, nanomaterials, genetic sciences. Literally, we're talking about harnessing those forces we cannot see with normal eyes. We need very, very powerful microscopes to understand what I call the bion, which is the bio, info, opto, and nanotechnologies. That's the left-hand side. On the other side, we're dealing with 10 to the power plus 9, the tera world, where we are talking about global logistics, global energy system, global financial system, the world of internet, WWW systems. We're extremely large, and now we are talking about space travel. So which is also kind of beyond the range of normal human comprehension. So because of these technologies, the world has really moved away from being able to touch technologies. We have to imagine technologies, bring into play, and deploy. So the power of imagination will become increasingly important as the curves move either to the left or to the right. And indeed, on top of that, we see the increase in complexity. I'll not get into the details, but a piece of work I did for a client to understand complexity. And we measured the number of variables a decision has to take into account and the amplitude of change of each of the variables. And indeed, over time, we see that between the early 90s and then 2014-15, the complexity has grown by several factors. So obviously, we're living in a world which have to deal with more complexity, more uncertainty, need for more imagination. And that's where I see to look at the world through this framework. So I've got two dimensions. One I call the degree of uncertainty dimension. It could be low uncertainty, a high degree of uncertainty, and the degree of complexity the world has to deal with, well-defined boundaries versus fuzzy boundaries. And as you would suspect, much of the 20th century management doctrines were defined in the deterministic model, where you could reasonably think of the future, that there would be linearity in our thinking process. And the name of the game was how to take advantage of scale, experience curve, leverage physical assets, vertical integration, discipline of more and better of the same. That's what was practiced. And that was good. And that's how all the management doctrines of the 20th century, whether we talk about what developed in Europe, what developed in the United States, even more so what developed in Japan. Now we have moved to a different world. It's disorderly, high degree of uncertainty, and industries do not have any boundaries anymore. Amazon was born with the concept of music and books to be digitized. Now, as you know, Amazon is all over the world. And similarly, Tesla is not just a car company, it is artificial intelligence company, it's a battery storage company, it's a solar energy company. It's basically creating a new kind of ecosystem and helping, to be honest with you, the way Elon Musk talks about it, to help transition from the fossil or the brown economy to the green economy. So as you could see, the world is indeed changing, and that's where we need leadership, which has got firstly a holistic perspective and quick responses, agile, and tremendous amount of insightfulness as to how different technologies, different aspects of social behaviors will come together. So if I now take a 100-year perspective, I'll do it very quickly. The industrial economy was characterized by these 8 features. I'll not get into the details of each, but as you could see, each one of them you're very familiar with. This is what we literally spoke, the language, when I was in business school, when I started teaching, when I was started my consulting career. These were the elements that we had to work on. Pretty much was at work between 1950 and 1990. Then came the knowledge economy 1.0, very different in nature. We are no longer talking about economies of scale. We're starting talking about economies of scope, economies of platform, economies of speed. And we talked about scalability, that if you have an idea how quickly we could scale. Then we are no longer talking about leverage of physical assets, leverage of knowledge assets. Apple takes pride not in manufactured in California, designed in Cupertino, manufactured in China. The real pride is the design, the knowledge management, personalization of products and services, modular systems design. So as you could see, all the 8 points, the knowledge economy 1.0 is very different, basically evolved between 1990 and 2015. And now we look into a different world again. 2015 onwards, when the social media, artificial intelligence, very powerful microscopic cameras became very, very important. A new world started emerging. People started talking about economies of intelligent collaboration. Not just leverage social assets, leverage a social IQ. And in fact, these days I'm using word EQ and SQ. EQ is emotional quotient, SQ spiritual quotient. So the world is indeed changing. If you look at the point number 4, collaboration across ecosystems using the power of AI. So if you look between 3, 4, 5, 6, you indeed see a fundamental change in the making. But unfortunately, many companies are still in the left-hand side mode. They're talking about the right, but their behaviors, the way the systems work, are pretty much in the right. I just want to give you an example. This is the Apple case. Now, Apple is a very interesting case. After Steve Jobs came back to Apple in the mid-90s, his focus was obviously product. Imagine what would the user need ahead of the user, and bring together product and service excellence. And that led to the development iPod. But individuals could choose what kind of music they want to store in the iPod. iPod was a revolution because it took away the whole consumer electronics from Sony. It came into Apple. But fast forward into, let's say, 2005, 2006, with the iPhone, Apple started bringing together hundreds of different applications for entertainment, music and movies, for professional services. You have special assistants reminding you of your meetings, perhaps organizing the meetings for you. And more recently, they have come up with the healthcare services. You can measure your oxygen level, you can measure your heartbeat, you can also time your exercises accordingly. But now, as you look at the knowledge economy 2.0, this created an ecosystem, the Apple environment, where the iWatch, the iPhone, the MacBook is talking to each other through the cloud and providing you a dynamic, innovative, uh, if you will, environment through which you particularly either improve your efficiency or enjoy your comfort or explore new dimensions of your own personality. There, I would also include not only entertainment and education, but perhaps spiritual development, physical development. And these are the kind of areas companies like Apple, Google are getting into, which I, by the way, call IoT to the power 3, which I'll discuss a bit later, is not only Internet of Things, to which is the connection with the iPhone and the refrigerator and the, let's say, the computer, but Internet of Thoughts. How do you bring multiple thoughts together? And then the third T is the Internet of Transcendence, Internet of Distinctiveness, Internet of deeper thoughts which you bring together to create future possibilities. So indeed, if I look at a macroeconomic perspective, much of the thoughts which developed in Europe, thanks to Adam Smith, all the way down to Cambridge, Massachusetts, Paul Samuelson, and the economists at MIT and Harvard, the thinking was around management of labor, natural resources, and capital. And that's how people talked about labor reforms that led to industrial revolution. But in the last 30 years, the human intellect has itself become extremely powerful. And as you know, human intellect doesn't have any boundaries. It moves around at the lightning speed. So obviously the nature of the business model, both at the macro level and the micro level, has changed, because the connection between capital and human intellect could germinate anywhere in the world and spread very rapidly. So we are indeed in a new economic paradigm where labor and natural resources continue to play an important role, but the nature of economic equations would be more driven by how does human capital and capital come together. Now that leads to the second question: given the new world, how do we think of organizations of the future? And that's where I like to introduce the art and science of self-regeneration. So we are talking about moving from the bottom left-hand corner to the top right-hand corner. And again, let's just remind ourselves, the bottom left-hand corner, the fundamental organizational design principles were firstly hierarchical in nature. Hierarchical decision-making came much from the militaristic thinking of command and control. Compliance was very important. Risk management was very important. Risk avoidance was very important. Name of the game was efficiency of execution. Discipline of more and better of the same. Easy to measure metrics. And most importantly, functional excellence. So you need someone who's good in manufacturing. You need a group which is good in marketing, sales. But that was the nature of our thought processes and workflows, I would say, from 1850s, even now, but applied till about 1990s. So now we are talking about how do we deal with the world which is disorderly and stochastic in nature. Now, people have made efforts. So if we call the bottom left-hand corner type A organization, some people move to type B, launching initiatives to create internal ventures. 3M is very well known for that, to create possibilities outside of the mainstream thinking. And then some other companies have talked about creating a network model, multi-headquarter model, giving more power to the national headquarters. But both the two cases, type B and type C, are essentially extension of type A. And as a result, we did not see much of the change because the type A dominated much of the thinking. Why? Because this is how we human beings typically suffer from. We have biases, we have implicit cognition, we have cognitive short circuits, we have psychological traps. We, as they say, old habits die hard, irrationalities in our minds, systemic cognitive errors. I can go on and on, but the key point is all of these are at work. So unless until we recognize how our inner minds work, it would be very difficult to switch to an organizational concept which is in tune with the knowledge economy 2.0. So that's where I introduced my biological model, which many thought leaders have embraced with a lot of appreciation, but I feel extremely humble. I'm still working on it. I say the future organization should first think of what are the ultimate qualities of an organization. An organization should, and talk about 5 functions. That's why you have 5 Fs. High-speed sensitivity or learning ability. Integration function, a lot of different ideas have to be brought together. Distributed leadership function, there should be small micro enterprises which could take leadership in shaping the future. Activist function, which could fundamentally change the nature of thinking and challenge status quo. An adaptive function, help the organization to continuously adapt to the new world. It should not be a step function, it should be a continuous function. And that is like an amoeba-like quality that we have to build. And that's how I look at the future organization. It's not a bunch of boxes pulled together in a hierarchical fashion, but these functions at work, which together create a value proposition at a very high-speed fashion, which the knowledge economy requires. So that's where the biological model belongs. And the big question that I ask is, how do we design the DNA of the biological model? It's an easy term to use. The Hire uses the word Rendon-High model. Now, how do we make it really work would be the next part of our discussion. To do so, I want to first once again focus on what does the hierarchical model do in the knowledge economy. And I picked up 3 reasons why I find it suffocating and constrains usage of human capacity. Encourage behaviors that consume emotional, intellectual, and spiritual energy, often to create negative value. The politics, my territory versus her territory versus his territory. And we spend an awful lot of time debating those boundaries. Nurture rigidity, insularity, limiting learning, and in the process we become brittle. Now, you know what happens when the bone becomes brittle, so it breaks very easily. So how to keep the bone supple, flexible, is the challenge of the new organization. And of course, it curbs a sense of ownership because the decisions come from the top. They know what they want, others have to execute. So the model that I'm talking about is, instead of Cartesian, I'm calling it the biological model. The left-hand side I call command and control Cartesian model. The new model that I am proposing in various forums, leadership forums, is the biological model, which is basically a collection of centers of expression centers or enterprising centers, independent, but towards a common purpose. And if you look at the 3 reasons why it is liberating, while the left-hand side is suffocating, this is liberating to maximize usage of self-expression. In every individual, there's a self which wants to express. Now, how do we firstly give accent to that expression and then bring the expressions together towards a common purpose? So encourage behaviors that expand use of emotional, intellectual, and spiritual energy, nurture fluidity, spirit of inquiry, learning, and diversity of expression and bring them together. And then, of course, cultivate the sense of ownership. So that's the biological model. Is typically cross-functional. It gives each of the ECs freedom to experiment and in the process explore new frontiers. And the role of leadership is extremely important here. Not that we are taking the leadership away, but it is not to command and control. It is to incubate new ideas, new ECs. ECs here stand for, by the way, enterprising centers or expression centers. Create the environment which can create more ECs and offer coaching and mentoring so that these companies could succeed and neutralize biases which often seep in from the past. So this is what the biological model is very much in line with, which is very similar to the Rund-High model, but it is perhaps a bit more futuristic. But Rund-High model is clearly a step towards the direction that I am trying to suggest. And this is how I see in the future how multiple ecosystems would come together. So you can have an EC set which is focused on nanotechnology 1. I'm calling EC set 1, enterprising set center, where you have multiple such ecosystems in set 1, which is focused on nanotechnologies, the other one on info, the third one, it could be on bio, and the fourth one could be on opto. And this is how you bring ecosystems together. And that's what defines what I call IoT to the power 3, or internet or interconnectedness of things, thoughts, and transcendence. Now, to do so, at the heart, the focus is the self. That's why I call it the human-centric model, catalyzing individual inspiration. So we need to put in place processes which will help self-awareness, self-expression, self-confidence, self-management. And I've laid out a process that companies could adopt. So there's a continuous process of self-development. So self-expression becomes more powerful. And in the process, the enterprising center becomes more powerful, which I'm calling, by the way, second order Kaizen. So Kaizen has been improvement of processes, improvement of product quality. Now I'm talking about improvement of the self development, so that there's a continuous process of development through challenging of individual biases, encouraging experiments, enable clear measurements, analyze matrix, and in fact, help the continuous process of reflection and fine-tuning your own behaviors. That leads to my final point, which is about the role of leadership towards enlightened strategic synergies to refresh organizational model, business models of the future. The first we have to keep in mind, again, I'm putting ourselves on a time machine. In the early 1900s, as you know, it was all about efficiency and discipline. The industrial economy was born, and the Cartesian model was based on division of labor and hierarchical discipline. So people specialize, they do repetitive work, and the time and motion study defined the nature of the organization. But then from the early 60s and 70s, but it took roots in the 80s and 90s, the digitization of business models began. We started seeing the initial inklings of knowledge economy 1.0, the network model people started talking about to enable collaboration, unlock individual creativity. But only few companies could do successfully. Most of them talked about it, but really could not make it happen. And now with the knowledge economy 2.0, we're talking about the 3 A's, how to continuously help organizations and individuals increase their level of aspirations, be adaptable and agile through dynamic synergies. So when I talk about the power of ecosystem, I basically emphasize the need to create dynamic synergies where each of the enterprising centers or the biological model have higher levels of aspiration, continuously adapting to change, and in the process becoming agile. So that's what the biological model is all about, to enable imagination and leverage social IQ. So if I again put it in the framework, the industrial economy was the bottom left-hand corner. The experiments in the 90s till today, I would say, were either on the bottom right-hand corner or the top left-hand corner, type B or type C, which was the period of knowledge economy 1.0. But now we are in the knowledge economy 2.0, where the name of the game would be real-time adaptation, self-organizing, decision-making capability, and excellence in experiment, not execution. That how do we enable experimentation and in the process create new value proposition. So as you could see, between the number 1 versus 2, there's a fundamental difference. One was about discipline and efficiency, hierarchy of decisions, functional excellence. But when we are talking about type D, or the point number 1 that we're talking about here, the real-time adaptation, self-organization, decisions, and experimental excellence. Now, the point is, how do you make it work? Very simple. We can create in any company incubation centers where we bring together people from multiple disciplines. This is a real life case which I work for oil and gas company. Now, they are the most rigid, as you know, I would suspect. So there are people from microfluidics, precision imaging, geophysical sciences, creating small incubation centers, bringing people from multiple function to serve a specific asset. Asset here may be basins in various parts of the world. Asset 1, it could be for something in North Sea, it could be something in Gulf of Mexico or Venezuela. So these are the assets, and how do you create these micro centers? To be able to do that, companies have to recognize, particularly from the leadership point of view, you have to think of the DNA. How do we create the new DNA of leadership? And I'm basically talking about there are 2 strands every company has to manage to make the transition. One strand I'm talking about OX, which is continuously enable operational excellence, because companies have to move on. So that must continue. But at the same time, strand 2 should continuously see game-changing opportunities to renew value creation thesis, which I'm calling RX. So when you have OX and RX working in harmony with each other through the lines that we have drawn, that's defined by the leadership style, and processes of self-reflection that we discussed earlier, self-development, self-awareness should connect the blue lines, the strand 1 with the strand 2. So that's what I call the definition of the future DNA. An ultimate goal would be to make uncommon connection. Interoperability is the name of the game. So when you are talking about ecosystems coming together, how to make them interoperable, make uncommon connections, in the product, adopt new vocabulary. Now, I would not get in the details of this, but as you could see, the red check marks was the ones which defined the 20th century organizational model. People were asked, what is our span of control? How do I check? We want a uniform culture. We want to create a stable organization. We want to optimize. We want to ensure that rank and file workers are working hard. Those were the terms. And I'm saying that's gone. The new terms should be not impose ideas, but inspire, not control, but catalyze, not check, but share, not make it stable, but make it unsettling so that you are continuously changing, not optimize, but extremize. And extremize, by the way, means to me that on both the extremes, you have to deliver 100 as opposed to finding a midpoint, which is compromise, which some people call optimize, not just live with uniform and enable multiform. So these are the new kinds of vocabulary we must think of. So in the process, the fundamental question is, how do we move the needle? So far, we have been on the right side, hierarchical model. The organizations were basically system-centric for deterministic environment. Now we have to move the needle to make it human-centric, which is comfortable with the world which is fuzzy, the world which is uncertain. And then we have to, obviously, every organization would need to design the levers so that we could really decide how will the needle move? Where should the needle be in stage one versus stage two versus stage three? Because to move it from all the way from right to left in one shot may not be that easy. And the key is, how do we connect the dots? How do we open up the third eye of the individual so that they could see the ultimate possibilities? And that's where I want to again underscore the importance of dynamics of knowledge creation. At the end of the day, a good company is one which can retain its eternal youthfulness. And that eternal youthfulness will come when we learn new traits, we unlearn old traits, we relearn new ways to use old traits. And that is a dynamic process that must continue. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and we'll look forward to some questions and answers session.
Thank you very much, Partha. You covered a lot of ground in relatively little time. It strikes me that do organizational models always lag behind technological reality? I mean, do you think at the turn of the 20th century, how slow were the organizational models to develop to respond to mass production?
That's a very good question, Stuart. I feel there are two kinds of organization. The incumbent ones normally step back until they're challenged. But the new ones, if I look at how Facebook was born, or how Google was born, or how Uber was born, they start with a fundamentally new concept, which is the technology, and that technology drives the organization. So for the incumbents, I often seen the lag is almost 15 to 20 years. If you look at the demise of Polaroid once upon a time was the darling of Wall Street. It was equivalent of Apple in the 1980s, as you may know, Stuart. Everyone had that instant camera. But Polaroid, if it was really keeping up with the technology as well as new organization model, perhaps could have created an Apple-like ecosystem. But instead, they got stuck. So I would say new companies which are born, they come with new technologies, they organize differently, they do not follow the rules. But old companies always lag, and typical lag has been particularly the ones who've survived about 15, 20 years.
Where are we? You talk about the IoT to the power of three and things, thoughts, and transcendence. I think we understand the Internet of Things, the Internet of Thoughts, and the Internet of Transcendence. So where are we in that process?
That's a good one. I think Internet of Things, as you know, is happening. Mr. Zhang talks about it in the higher context, which is connecting the refrigerator with the, with the food, the dinner, and he talks about all kinds of things that you bring together. But in terms of Internet of Thoughts, that means you have an idea, I have an idea, we bring it together to create a super idea. That is happening in companies like Google. I see it. I said some of the newer companies which have born in the last 5-7 years. Their basic play is how to bring people from multiple disciplines and integrate their thoughts. And the social media has been the base on which that has happened. The cloud has been the base. But as far as the Internet of Transcendence, that has not yet happened consciously. But it could happen unconsciously, because ultimately when I start or you start interfacing with a lot of people with thoughts, you ultimately end up selecting those with whom you connect spiritually, that there's an element of logic which is beyond the normal reasoning, but you understand that individual better, so that you become more conscious of the quality of the spiritual elegance of thinking of the individual. I'll give you an example. You know Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein and Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore is a first poet to receive, first individual to receive Nobel Prize from Asia. They met at Einstein's home after Tagore got the Nobel Prize, or Albert Einstein got the Nobel Prize, and Tagore was in Stockholm, and then he went to Germany. And they were talking about truth and beauty. Now, Einstein was looking at truth and beauty from the point of view of science, and his point was that truth and beauty is independent of human eyes. Whereas Tagore's point was that truth and beauty is dependent on human eyes, because without the individual, what is the truth? What is the other dimension of truth that we do not know? And he gave a very simple example. He showed his book, which got the Nobel Prize, Gitanjali, and asked Albert Einstein, "You value this book, right, sir, professor?" And he said, "Yes. But to an insect, this is just a food. He will eat it up." So it is all relative. So being able to, a scientist and a philosopher connecting, that's what I call the transcendence. And that leads to newer types of possibilities.
You talk about leadership, humility, reflectiveness, self-awareness, imagination, are characteristics of the new leadership you describe, but they're not things that get you promoted currently.
No.
How far away are we? I mean, there's a lot of talk about, I mean, Jim Collins talked about level 5 leaders. There's lots of talk about humility, but it's not what gets you to the top normally.
That's a very good question. And Stuart, as you know, what happens when you join a company like British Petroleum or Royal Dutch Shell, you join as an engineer, you get gradually promoted. You get promoted because you have been a caretaker of an asset or a function. You've done a good job. You've shown great impact because of the economics of your decisions, economics of your actions. You keep moving up as a caretaker. So when you become the CEO or the chairman of a company, or join the board, or become maybe the VP of a company, your basic mental makeup is of caretaking. You do not want to rock the boat. You do not want to change. You want quick decision, quick action, and show 3 months results, which are good. So for such people to change when you are in your 50s, or even if you get chosen early, let's say 40s, is extremely difficult. Unless there is a place where companies are continuously conditioned that as you grow, it is not caretaking, it is exploring new territories, taking risks, not avoiding risks, being able to see the unknown. That's why you're a leader. And I think we do not talk about it. So I'm so glad you brought it up. I have got a leadership model, which is called the 3 I's. I'll quickly touch on it. One is the power of intellect, which I think we are taught and we learn in business school, how to use your intelligence to structure decisions, organize work. That's good. Second is the power of intuition. We are normally quite poor, which is intuitive power, that being able to sense possibilities which you may not be able to reason. Albert Einstein thinking that there may be fields which interact with each other in the same field, where there is a magnetic field or gravitational field or light. They're basically wave theory, and they come together in general theory of relativity. Now that's driven by intuition, but then he uses the logic, mathematically proves it. And the third one, which we are not at all taught in any school, which is how do I explore my inner universe, the spiritual mind, and connect with the external universe, which are the people around you. And in the process, create the right kind of harmony, which I call the inner charisma. I remember to have met Mother Teresa once in Calcutta. And, she walked into the room. She's about, as you know, quite short. But as soon as she walked in, there was a glow. Everything became silence. She didn't speak much. But I could see she connected. I was only, 10, 12 years old. So he connected with everyone. That's called interconnectedness of inner universe. And we are not taught. I mean, I think it's something that we have to more and more do, particularly as we move into a world which is significantly more fuzzy and significantly more uncertain. So leadership there would need for us to have capabilities which are a bit more than just being decisive. I think we have to learn how to be more explorative and be able to bring more compassion into play to inspire people.
Are you optimistic that we can embrace these concepts in organizations?
Well, the story that all depends upon you. That's why uh, I think I was talking about how to convert this into an article or a book, because I think we have to uh, make efforts. I'm optimistic actually, because only thing as Winston Churchill did say that, you know, we go through messy processes. He was talking in the context of democracy. Uh, I think that it would not be easy, but you know, it's a spiral. We go round and round, but gradually we move towards a direction. Unfortunately, it takes too much time. There is a lot of built-in momentum that we have to overcome, but either they get overcome through crisis. Like Japan is facing a crisis because Japan practiced the industrial model extremely well. It became part of the culture. You know, the hierarchy, there's respect for seniority, kaizen, but you know, it's a system driven thinking. So individuals got lost. Now Japan, in fact, I'll be giving a talk, I'll invite you on April 7th, where Mr. Zhang would be there, by the way. I will send you the invitation, where we will be discussing that how should Japan change. So I think sometimes it takes a crisis, sometimes proactive thinking, leadership helps. You know, people like Elon Musk is bringing a lot of new thinking in United States, but at the same time, he gets criticized once a week at least for what he does, how he does it. But you know, that's what it takes. You know, we have to stand up with new ideas against past momentum.
Partha, thank you very much. I think we could talk all night about the things you've brought up, the 5 functions of future organizations: learn, unlearn, relearn, IoT, the power of free, and much more. Partha Ghosh, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you.